Picture this. How would you feel if a watch dealer rejected the watch you paid $400 for? You'll be pissed, but this is the reality of many watch owners. And it's not because your watch is fake or because it's broken. It's because of the name on the dial. In the watch business, some brands are so difficult to resell that dealers would rather pass than risk having them sit in the display case for months. If you own one of them, my deepest condolences. And if you're thinking about buying one of them, you shouldn't. And on that note, these are the 5 brands dealers quietly hope you never bring through the door. 5. Michael Kors. If your watch is a Michael Kors, here's why a pawnbroker barely looks up. Crack open the back of almost any Michael Kors watch, and you'll find a Miyota movement, the same mass-produced Japanese quartz engine that costs the company somewhere between $5 and $10 to source. The case might be stainless steel. The dial might say Michael Kors in that clean, expensive-looking font. None of that changes what's ticking underneath. You didn't buy a watch. You bought a logo with a clock glued to the back of it. It's worth saying plainly that there's nothing inherently shameful about a $5 movement. Seiko and Casio build entire reputations on cheap, reliable quartz engines, and people trust those brands for decades. The difference is honesty. Seiko sells you a $60 watch and prices it like a $60 watch. Michael Kors sells you the same internal hardware and prices it like you're buying into something with horological weight behind it. Fossil Group manufactures the watch, not Michael Kors, the fashion house. The two companies signed their first licensing deal back in 2004, and they've renewed it again and again since, most recently extending the arrangement through 2027, which means an entire generation of Michael Kors watch buyers has never once bought a watch actually designed and built by the people whose name is on the dial. Fossil is the same company quietly assembling Armani Exchange, Diesel, and a dozen other fashion watch labels on the same factory lines, swapping dial fonts and case shapes like costume changes on the same actor. The brand most people picture when they hear Michael Kors watch doesn't actually make watches. It licenses its name to a company that's very good at one specific skill, making a quartz movement look like it belongs in something heavier than it is. So what happens when the logo wears off the illusion? A teenager gets one for her birthday. Within 6 months, the crystals set into the bezel start falling out, one by one, like loose teeth. She brings it back. Fossil Group calls it wear and tear. Not a defect. Wear and tear on a watch that's been worn for half a year. The repair quote comes back close to what the watch cost new. She doesn't get it fixed. She puts it in a drawer instead, where it joins a graveyard of nearly identical watches owned by nearly identical teenagers, all of them learning the same lesson at the same age. Shiny doesn't mean built. That's the regret moment. Not a single dramatic failure. A slow leak of trust, one fallen stone at a time, until the watch quietly stops being worn at all. Walk through resale listings and you'll see the real verdict. Michael Kors watches that retailed for $200 or more routinely list for a small fraction of that on the secondary market, often sitting unsold for weeks, even at those prices. Buyers on watch forums describe the brand using nearly identical language without ever talking to each other. MK watches are inflated like Invicta, one repair technician wrote, noting the movement inside is dramatically smaller than the case that surrounds it. That's not an isolated complaint. That's a pattern repair people see daily on watches they didn't build and don't particularly want to work on. Here's a quiet detail that says more than any number could. The packaging for a Michael Kors watch is, in almost every documented case, more expensive to produce than the movement sitting inside it. The box has weight. The ribbon has texture. The unboxing is engineered down to the second, because the box is the only part of the purchase that's actually competing with luxury watchmaking. Once it's open, the watch is on its own. Think about who's actually wearing these. Not collectors, not people chasing investment pieces. A college student buying her first nice watch for an internship. A boyfriend grabbing something that looks expensive for an anniversary without quite knowing what's inside it. They're not being foolish. They're being marketed to by a company that understood, with total precision, exactly how much weight a logo can carry before someone checks what's underneath it. There's a version of this story that plays out at almost every department store watch counter in the country. A salesperson points to the case, the dial, the bracelet, the warranty card, everything visible. Nobody points to the movement, because the movement is the one part of the purchase that doesn't photograph well and doesn't justify the price. The entire transaction is built around showing you everything except the thing that actually determines whether the watch is worth what you're paying. We get why the appeal is real, by the way. A watch that looks like it cost $500 for the price of $100 feels like a win in the moment you buy it. The problem only shows up later, in the drawer, in the resale listing nobody bids on, in the 6-month repair, quote, that costs almost as much as starting over. There's a reason fashion houses keep licensing their names to watch manufacturers instead of building watch divisions themselves. Watchmaking is slow, expensive, and unforgiving of shortcuts in a way that handbags and sunglasses simply aren't. A clothing brand can hide a cheap zipper under good tailoring. A watch can't hide a $5 movement once the second hand starts skipping. Licensing solves that problem instantly, for the brand. The customer is the one left holding the actual hardware. Michael Kors borrowed nothing but a logo. The next brand on this list borrowed 2 centuries of somebody else's history. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 4. Invicta. In 1837, a man named Raphael Picard built a watch company in La Chaux-de-Fonds, the Swiss town that would later give the world Tag Heuer and Omega. Picard's watches were good, solid enough to win a gold medal at a Swiss exhibition in 1914, durable enough that Allied soldiers wore them through the Second World War. That company is dead. It's been dead since the 70s, when the quartz crisis swept across Switzerland and buried half the country's watchmakers along with it. The Invicta you see today isn't that company. It's a name. In 1991, an investor named Eyal Lalo bought the rights to the Invicta name and rebuilt it from Hollywood, Florida, 3,000 miles and an ocean away from La Chaux-de-Fonds. There's nothing illegal about reviving a dead brand name. Plenty of legacy companies have done it, and some have done it honestly. The problem is what Invicta chose to do with the ghost it was wearing. Walk past an Invicta display at any mall jeweler and you'll see the trick immediately. A watch tagged at £595 on permanent sale for 85% off. Every single watch. Every single day. All year round. That's not a discount. That's a price that was never real in the first place, designed purely to make $60 feel like a steal instead of what it actually is. Full retail for a watch built to look enormous, look bold, and look, very specifically, like something it isn't. Here's the part that should bother you more than the fake markdowns. Look at an Invicta dive watch from across a room and your brain reaches for one comparison immediately: Rolex. The scalloped bezel, the proportions, the general silhouette of a Submariner, sanded down and mass-produced at a fraction of the cost and, more importantly, a fraction of the standard. One owner's account, posted alongside dozens of nearly identical complaints, describes buying one of those dive watches, wearing it swimming once, showering in it once or twice more, and finding water inside the case within 3 weeks. Invicta's response wasn't an apology. It was a $30 repair, quote, with a note that if their team decided the failure wasn't their fault, the price could go higher. He called it his first and last Invicta. He wasn't alone. Across owner reviews, you'll find the same complaint dressed in different words. Fragile straps that crack if you bend them wrong, pins that won't stay seated, crystals that fog from the inside because nobody cleaned them properly before the case was sealed. And here's the detail that should really land. This isn't a problem Invicta solved with time. A 2026 review of the brand's online store flagged something specific. Build quality declining year after year, with the 2025 to 2026 window being the worst stretch yet. Nearly 200 years after Raphael Picard's name first appeared on a dial, the company wearing his legacy is getting worse at the one thing he was actually good at. I keep coming back to this one, if I'm honest. Most brands on this list never had real heritage to betray. Invicta did. Somewhere in a Swiss archive, there's a genuine gold medal from 1914, earned by watchmakers who never could have imagined what would eventually be selling under their name. There's an entire generation of Invicta owners who simply don't know any of this, and that's not a criticism of them. The branding never tells you the company died once already. The website never mentions Hollywood, Florida. It mentions Switzerland, watchmaking heritage, and a founding date that's technically true and almost entirely beside the point, since the only thing connecting the watch on your wrist to the watch Raphael Picard built is a trademark that changed hands twice and an ocean it crossed once. Picture the customer standing at that mall kiosk, watching the salesman point at the 85% off sticker like it means something. He doesn't know about Raphael Picard. He doesn't know the company changed hands, changed continents, changed everything except the name on the dial. He just sees a big watch and a small price and thinks he's found a deal. He has no idea he just bought a discount on a number that was invented specifically to be discounted. What's strange is that Invicta isn't even hiding the bait and switch. It's printed right there on the receipt. Original price, sale price, savings. Customers don't feel deceived in the moment, because the deception is dressed up as generosity. You only notice it later, the first time you try to sell the watch and discover that everyone on the secondary market already knows the 85% off was never real to begin with, which means the watch was never worth the inflated number you thought you were saving against. There's a pattern in the customer service complaints that's worth pulling apart on its own. It isn't just that watches arrive damaged or run fast and slow. It's the shape of the response every single time. Orders split without warning because inventory wasn't actually where the website said it was. Refund requests met with a script about automated policies rather than a person willing to look at the specific situation. One buyer waited from September to the following February for a single watch, called repeatedly, and was told each time that other customers had been waiting even longer, as though that should have been comforting. None of this is catastrophic on its own. Stacked together, across thousands of nearly identical stories, it stops looking like bad luck and starts looking like a business model that assumes most people won't bother chasing the problem all the way through. Which one of these would actually surprise you the most if a friend told you they owned it? That's worth sitting with before we get to number 3. Number 3 invented a person who never existed at all. 3. Filippo Loretti. Picture the name first. Filippo Loretti. It sounds like a 4th-generation Florentine watchmaker, doesn't it? Like someone whose grandfather built movements by hand in a workshop near the Arno, passing the trade down through 3 more generations before the watch in question ever reached a showroom floor. Filippo Loretti does not exist. Never did. The brand was founded by 2 brothers from Lithuania who picked 2 Italian-sounding words because Italian-sounding words sell watches to people who associate Italy with craftsmanship rather than crowdfunding. There is no founder. There is no Florentine workshop. There is a Kickstarter page, a slick video, and a name engineered in a focus group rather than handed down through a family. In their first major campaign, Filippo Loretti raised more than €3.5 million from over 16,000 backers. The pitch was the one you've heard a dozen times by now. Cut out the middlemen. Skip the inflated markups of traditional Swiss brands. Get luxury-grade craftsmanship at a startup price. Backers didn't get craftsmanship. Many of them didn't get a working watch. The honeymoon, if you can call it that, lasted exactly as long as the campaign video did. Then came the wait. Backers describe waiting 6 months, 10 months, in some cases close to 2 years for a watch they'd already paid for. When the watches finally arrived, for the people who received anything at all, the complaints started rolling in with a consistency that's almost impressive. A chronograph second-hand stopped moving by day 3, then detached completely and rattled around loose inside the case. Another buyer described the same fault on a different model, the timing mechanism simply giving out within the first week of normal wear. This is the part that should bother you. The brand launched a third crowdfunding round before even finishing deliveries from the second, and customers were still posting unfulfilled order complaints into 2026, nearly a decade after that first campaign went live. The regret arrives in a specific, recognizable shape. You ordered a watch in March. By July, you're emailing customer service for an update. By the following March, you've stopped expecting a reply and started searching the company name alongside the word scam, only to discover thousands of people running exactly the same search. What makes this one different from a simple late shipping problem is the layer underneath it. Reviewers who've tracked the brand for years allege that Filippo Loretti uses paid review services to inflate its ratings while quietly deleting the negative ones that slip through, meaning the 5-star praise scattered across the internet may not be customers at all. One watch industry reviewer pointed out that the brand's watches are manufactured in Shenzhen, not Italy, and that visually similar pieces sell for a few dollars on wholesale marketplaces, a gap he estimated at roughly 40 times markup once Filippo Loretti's luxury pricing was applied to a brand story built entirely from nothing. One backer's review, echoing dozens of others on the same complaint board, put it about as plainly as it can be put. She'd been waiting since the original campaign. The emails had stopped getting answered months earlier, and by the time she wrote her review, she'd stopped asking for a refund and just wanted the situation to be over. There's something almost theatrical about how confident the deception is. Most fake heritage brands at least try to be subtle, dropping a vague reference to European craftsmanship and hoping nobody asks follow-up questions. Filippo Loretti built an entire fictional biography, a real city, a plausible-sounding full name, the kind of detail that makes a watch feel earned rather than manufactured, right up until you try to verify a single piece of it and find nothing there at all. Picture the box itself arriving, finally, after the months of silence. The branding inside is polished, the kind of clean European minimalism that actually looks the part in a product photo. For a moment, opening it, the weight almost feels worth it. Then the watch is on the wrist, and within days, the same fragile internals other backers warned about start showing up in this unit too, and the polished box turns out to have been doing almost all of the actual work the brand promised the movement would do. Here's an observation worth sitting with. The brand didn't fail because the watches were bad. Plenty of bad watches sell fine for years. It failed the trust test the moment customers realized the story wrapped around the watch was as fabricated as the case it shipped in late, which means every other claim the brand made, about materials, about origin, about the 10-year warranty it advertised so confidently, immediately became suspect too. Once a brand lies about who it is, nobody believes anything else it says. That's the part worth carrying into the rest of this list. A fabricated founder is easy to spot once you go looking. A fabricated discount, a fabricated heritage, a fabricated promise about cutting out the middleman, those take longer to unravel because they're built on top of something that's at least partly true. Filippo Loretti just happens to be the version where the lie was the entire foundation, with nothing real holding it up underneath. Filippo Loretti built a fake heritage from nothing. The next brand on this list built something real, then sold the truth the moment it stopped being convenient. 2. MVMT. 2 college dropouts. Indiegogo. A modest funding goal of $15,000. That's where MVMT started in 2013, and the pitch from founders Jake Casson and Kramer LaPlante was sharp enough to land. Traditional watch brands were charging hundreds, sometimes thousands, for movements that cost almost nothing to produce. MVMT promised to strip out the markup and sell you the same basic hardware, honestly priced, wrapped in clean, minimalist design. The campaign blew past its goal, pulling in roughly $300,000 instead of $15,000. Forbes would later call MVMT the world's fastest-growing watch brand. By 2017, the company had crossed $71 million in annual revenue. That's the honeymoon, and it's worth sitting with for a second because it was real. Casson and LaPlante built something millions of people wanted to wear, using nothing but Instagram ads and a story about fighting back against industry markup. Then Movado Group, the same Movado that's been a real watchmaker since 1881, wrote a check for an initial payment of $100 million, with up to $100 million more available depending on performance. and bought the whole thing. Here's the pivot. The company built on the promise of escaping watch industry markups became, the moment it sold, exactly what it promised to liberate people from. What followed reads like a slow-motion betrayal of the founding pitch. Customers who'd been buying MVMT for years started reporting that prices had quietly doubled after the Movado acquisition. One longtime buyer, a part-time jeweler with a decade of repair experience, watched the metal hour markers on her watch fall off and rattle loose inside the case, then watched the crystal shatter entirely. Movado's customer service offered 20% off her next order. Not a repair, not a refund. A coupon for a brand that no longer needed her loyalty because it had already cashed out. The reaction online wasn't subtle. One watch forum thread summarized it in 5 words that might be the most honest review MVMT ever received. What a crock of garbage. More or less, though the original word was considerably less polite. Another commenter, watching MVMT's TV ads roll past during a football game, described the exact moment of recognition most of us have had with this brand, watching a company promise honesty about pricing while quietly charging more than the markup they claim to be fighting. Do you still own one of the watches I have talked about so far? So, the clearest measure of the damage isn't a number, it's a video. One of the internet's biggest men's-style influencers posted a glowing comparison calling MVMT watches superior to a Rolex on basically every front. That video collected roughly 32,000 dislikes against fewer than 7,000 likes. A ratio so lopsided for a creator whose other content rarely drew significant backlash that it became its own small case study in what happens when an audience realizes they've been sold something. There's a quieter detail buried in all of this. Before Movado bought them, MVMT had started shifting toward better components on its own. A sign the founders, whatever else you think of their marketing, weren't entirely cynical. After the sale, several reviewers who'd tracked the brand for years noted the newer pre-Movado models had actually improved, only for prices and complaints to spike again once the new ownership took the wheel. The company didn't get worse because the product changed. It got worse because the incentive that made it good in the first place, the need to prove the pitch was real, disappeared the moment the check cleared. Real question though, how does a brand built entirely on exposing industry markup turn around and become the markup? It's not really a mystery once you follow the money. The founders weren't selling a movement against industry greed forever. They were selling a pitch long enough to make it valuable to someone bigger. And once that sale closed, the pitch had already done its job. Nobody at the negotiating table needed it to keep being true. You will see this exact pattern again if you watch closely enough. In watches and well outside of them, a scrappy brand builds its entire identity around being the honest alternative to an established industry, gets big enough to attract a buyer from inside that very industry, and sells out the moment the number on the table is large enough. The audience that believed the original pitch is rarely consulted before the signature goes on the contract. Picture the founders in that first Indiegogo campaign video, standing in front of a camera explaining, with total conviction, that the watch industry had been lying to its customers for decades about what a movement actually costs to produce. People believed them because the math was simple enough to check yourself. 5 years and $100 million later, the same founders were no longer the ones answering customer emails, and the prices on the website had started climbing toward the exact markup they'd built a company exposing. Nobody forced that shift. It happened the moment ownership changed hands, because the entire point of the original pitch had always been to get big enough to sell, not to keep the promise running forever. MVMT sold the dream of an honest watch industry, then cashed out the moment it stopped needing to keep that promise. Brand number 1 never bothered pretending to be honest in the first place. 1. Jacob and Co. In 1987, a rapper named Biz Markie walked into a stall in New York's Diamond District and asked for a ring big enough to see from the back row of a concert. The jeweler who made it, a young Soviet immigrant named Jacob Arabo, had no idea he was about to become hip-hop's most name-dropped accessory dealer for the next 2 decades. By the early 2000s, Jacob the jeweler, as Arabo had become known, wasn't just making jewelry anymore. He was making watches, and the watch that made his name was the 5-time Zone, an enormous diamond pave quartz piece that Jay-Z, Kanye West, Pharrell, and Busta Rhymes all wore on camera, in lyrics, in liner notes. He also manufactured Lil' Kim's entire line of royalty watches, putting his workshop directly inside the catalog of one of hip-hop's biggest stars rather than just dressing her for a video shoot. Kanye rapped about going to Jacob an hour after I got my advance. That's not product placement. That's a man who became part of the culture's vocabulary for what success sounds like. Inside that watch, though, was a quartz movement, not a complicated Swiss mechanical engine. The same basic category of hardware that powers a $60 Casio, dressed up in a case the size of a fist and surrounded by enough diamonds to make the technical question feel irrelevant. And for a long time, to the people buying it, it really was irrelevant. Nobody buying a 5-time Zone in 2003 cared about the movement inside it. They cared about being seen wearing it. Here's the part where the story stops being about watches. In June 2006, federal agents arrested Arabo at his own Manhattan store. The accusation: helping the Black Mafia family, a Detroit-based drug trafficking ring, launder roughly $270 million in narcotics profits through jewelry transactions. The investigation had been running for 7 years. It eventually swept up more than 40 people. Federal authorities say the broader case resulted in the seizure of over 1,000 pounds of cocaine and $19 million in cash, cars, and jewelry. Arabo pleaded guilty in October 2007, not to money laundering directly, which prosecutors agreed to drop as part of the deal, but to falsifying records and lying to federal investigators. The judge handed down 2.5 years in federal prison, a $50,000 fine, and ordered a $2 million forfeiture payment to the government. Standing before the court, Arabo said he felt ashamed he'd broken the laws of a country that had been good to him. He reported to prison the following January. Sit with the timeline for a second. The same brand whose watches were being rapped about as the literal sound of having made it was, at that exact moment, allegedly tangled up with one of the most violent drug operations the Midwest had seen in a decade. The King of Bling nickname wasn't just marketing color. It described a man moving through worlds where the line between celebration and crime ran thinner than anyone in the audience realized. The federal prosecutor who announced the sentence didn't mince words about why it mattered beyond one man's prison term. People who sell jewelry and other expensive goods, he said, are in an easy position to help people hide assets they shouldn't have, and the sentence should stand as a warning that this kind of conduct carries real consequences. That's not a watch reviewer's opinion. That's the United States government explaining, on the record, why a jeweler to the stars ended up doing federal time. The collector world has its own, quieter verdict on what's left once you strip away the criminal history and the celebrity endorsements. The watches don't hold value well. Ask around any watch forum about brands that lose money fastest on resale, and Jacob & Co. comes up almost immediately, usually before anyone's even finished typing the question. Owners describe 5-time Zone pieces losing the overwhelming majority of their purchase price the moment they leave the case, the kind of collapse usually reserved for cars driven off a dealer's lot. There's no Swiss horological tradition propping the resale value up. There's no in-house movement collectors fight over. There's a quartz engine, a famous name, and a story that was, for a stretch in the 2000s, electric in its own right up until federal prosecutors got involved. A man in his 30s still has the 5-time Zone he bought during the brand's hip-hop peak, back when wearing one meant something specific and unmistakable. He doesn't wear it anymore. It sits in a drawer, not because it stopped working, but because the world that made it meaningful moved on. And what's left is a watch that was never really about telling time in the first place. The brand making that watch was, at its commercial peak, tangled up with one of the most damaging drug operations a federal task force had spent 7 years trying to take down. That's not a footnote to the Jacob & Co. story. For a long time, that was the story. The watch was never really the product in any of these 5 stories. The feeling was, and the story behind the feeling was the thing each brand actually sold. Feelings, it turns out, don't hold their value nearly as well as the people selling them want you to believe. If you've ever bought a watch and felt that flicker of doubt the second you got it home, that's worth listening to. I put together a free guide breaking down exactly what separates a real value watch from a dressed-up fashion accessory, brand by brand, price point by price point. It's in the pinned comment. Go grab it before your next purchase, not after. Which one of these 5 surprised you the most? Drop the name below, like this video, and subscribe.